The glass conference room at Peterson & Sons Construction had never felt more like a fortress than it did that Tuesday morning. I stood outside watching my husband's family discuss the future of their business while treating me like I was some random employee who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. Blood relatives only, my sister-in-law Diana had said with that particular smirk she reserved for moments when she wanted to remind me that I wasn't really part of their precious family legacy. My husband Marcus had given me that apologetic shrug, the same one he'd been using for 3 years whenever his family decided to exclude me from important decisions. The same shrug that said, "You understand, right? It's just easier this way." What they didn't understand was that I'd been quietly watching their family business circle the drain for 18 months. Peterson & Sons was hemorrhaging money, losing contracts, and making decisions that would have made my business school professors weep. But every time I tried to offer suggestions, I got the same response: family business, family decisions. I walked to my car and pulled out my phone. The text I sent was simple: execute Clause 47B immediately. Full dissolution. Victoria. My lawyer responded within minutes. Are you certain? This cannot be undone. I'm certain, I typed back. They want family business? They can have what's left of it. The Peterson family had no idea that their family business had been operating on borrowed time for over a year. What they also didn't know was that the loan keeping them afloat wasn't from some faceless bank, it was from Bennett Capital, the investment firm I'd built from scratch after graduating top of my class from Wharton. While Diana Peterson was busy playing Queen Bee of the family business, I'd been quietly building an empire. Marcus knew I worked in finance, but he'd never bothered to ask exactly what that meant. His family assumed I was probably some mid-level account manager somewhere, grateful to have married into their successful construction dynasty. The reality was slightly different. Bennett Capital managed $50 million in commercial real estate investments. I owned controlling interests in 12 businesses across the state. And I held the note on Peterson & Sons emergency loan, the one that had kept them from bankruptcy when their biggest client stiffed them last year. My phone started ringing at exactly 10:47 a.m. Victoria. Marcus's voice was panicked. Something's happening with the business loan. The bank is calling it in immediately. They want full payment by 5 p.m. today or they are seizing all our assets. I was sitting in my actual office by then, the corner suite on the 15th floor of the downtown financial district that Marcus had never bothered to visit. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Peterson & Sons construction site where they were working on their biggest project, completely unaware that the funding had just evaporated. That's terrible, honey, I said calmly, signing papers my assistant had brought in. What are you going to do? I don't know. Dad's calling everyone he knows trying to get an emergency loan. Diana's having a complete meltdown. We owe $2.8 million and we have maybe $50,000 in the business account. I murmured, reviewing a contract for another property acquisition. That does sound stressful. Victoria, I need to ask, do you think your company might be able to help? Even a small bridge loan? I smiled, looking out at the city I'd been quietly conquering while his family dismissed me as an irrelevant outsider. My company. You work in finance, right? Maybe you could put in a good word with someone. 3 years. 3 years of marriage, and my husband had never once asked me what I actually did for work. He'd never visited my office, never inquired about my meetings, never wondered how I could afford to contribute equally to our household expenses on what he assumed was a modest salary. I'll see what I can do, I said. But Marcus, these kinds of emergency loans usually come with pretty strict terms. By noon, my phone had exploded with calls. Marcus's father, Diana, his brother Paul, even his mother who barely spoke to me under normal circumstances. They were all suddenly very interested in talking to me about my connections in the finance world. I let them all go to voicemail. At 2 p.m., I walked into the Peterson & Sons office like I had dozens of times before, except this time, instead of being treated like Marcus's wife who didn't quite belong, I was greeted by Diana rushing toward me with barely concealed desperation. Victoria. Thank God you're here. Marcus said you might be able to help with the loan situation. The entire family was crammed into the main office. Marcus's parents, Diana and her husband, Paul and his wife, even their elderly uncle who rarely left his house. They all looked at me with the kind of hope usually reserved for lottery tickets. I spoke with my company, I said, settling into the chair they'd suddenly pulled out for me. The good news is that we might be able to help. The collective sigh of relief was audible. Marcus squeezed my hand. I knew you'd come through. What kind of terms are we looking at? I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Well, that's where it gets interesting. My company already holds your debt. The room went silent. Diana's face scrunched in confusion. What do you mean? I mean Bennett Capital has been your lender for the past 14 months. The emergency loan that saved you from bankruptcy last year? That was my money. Marcus stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Your money. My company's money, technically. But yes, I'm the one who's been keeping Peterson and Sons afloat. I pulled out the loan documents. These are the papers you signed 18 months ago when you were 3 weeks away from losing everything. His father, Robert Peterson, grabbed the papers with shaking hands. This can't be right. We borrowed from First National Bank. You borrowed from Bennett Capital through First National Bank. They were just the servicer. I pointed to the signature line. That's my signature authorizing the loan. The room erupted in chaos. Diana was insisting this was impossible. Paul was frantically reading through papers, and Marcus looked like he was having an existential crisis. You own an investment company? Marcus asked weakly. I am Bennett Capital. I founded it 5 years ago with the inheritance from my grandmother. I pulled out my business card, the one with my name and title, Victoria Bennett, CEO and founder. I've been trying to tell you about my work for 3 years, but every time I brought up business, your family made it clear that wasn't my place. Diana's voice was barely a whisper. You've been our bank this whole time. I've been your lifeline. And according to the terms of the loan, I have the right to call it in immediately if certain conditions aren't met. I flipped to page 12 of the contract. Specifically, if there's evidence of financial mismanagement or if the borrower fails to maintain professional standards in their business relationships. Marcus was reading over my shoulder. What does that mean? It means that excluding your business partner from business meetings constitutes a breach of professional standards. Your wife. What didn't you understand, Margaret? That poor people can be smart? That women can make money? That your son chose me because he loves me, not because I needed saving. I stood up again, this time gathering my papers. The rental agreement is on the table. You have until Friday to decide. If you'd rather find somewhere else to live, I'll give you 60 days to move out. But the days of treating me like I don't belong here are over. As I headed toward the door, Robert called out, Alexandra, wait. I turned back. What about the country club membership? I smiled. Funny you should ask. I bought that too. Turns out they were planning to cancel your membership for non-payment next month. You can keep it, but you'll need to start actually paying the monthly fees. Margaret looked up from her tears. You bought our country club membership. The club was very understanding when I explained the situation. They are willing to transfer the membership to my name and allow you to remain as my guests. As long as you're current on payments, of course. David shook his head in amazement. Is there anything else you've been secretly taking care of? Your brother's restaurant loan. I bought that debt from the bank too. He has 6 months to start making payments or I'll have to make some difficult decisions about the collateral. The room fell silent again as the full scope of my financial intervention sank in. The thing is, I continued, I don't want to be your family's banker. I want to be your family's daughter-in-law. There's a difference. I picked up the rental agreement and handed it to Margaret. This includes a clause about family dinners. If I'm paying to keep this house in your family, I expect to be treated like family when I'm here. No more comments about my background, my clothes, or my qualifications to be David's wife. Margaret nodded, clutching the papers like a lifeline. We can do that. We should have done that years ago. Good. Because I've been looking forward to having a real family for a very long time. I looked around the room at each of them. I just never expected I'd have to buy my way into it. As I walked to the door, David followed me. Alex, wait. I had no idea you'd been handling all of this alone. I turned to face my husband, the man I'd fallen in love with 5 years ago despite his family's obvious disapproval. I wasn't handling it alone, David. I was handling it quietly. There's a difference. What do you need from me? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I need you to start seeing me as your partner, not your charity case. I need you to stop letting your family treat me like an outsider. And I need you to understand that the woman you married is a lot stronger than any of you gave her credit for. David pulled me into his arms. I'm sorry it took foreclosure papers for me to see that. Well, I said, laughing for the first time all evening, at least now we know where we'll be spending Christmas for the next few years. From inside the dining room, I could hear Margaret tentatively asking Robert, do you think she meant it about the Corvette? I squeezed David's hand. Should we tell them about the car loan I paid off last week? Maybe save that revelation for next Sunday's dinner, David grinned. I think they've had enough shock for one evening. As we walked to our car, I felt the satisfaction of finally being seen for who I really was, not a charity case, but the woman who had just saved their entire family from financial ruin. And the best part? I didn't have to destroy anything to do it. I just had to stop pretending to be smaller than I actually was. The rental agreement would be signed by Friday. Margaret would apologize properly by Sunday. And David would never again assume that quiet meant helpless. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply showing people exactly who they've been underestimating all along.